Our project was to create a mug using slub casting. The first step was to create the design for the mug in Onshape. The idea was to 3D print an impression to mold the plaster around. We 3D printed a left hand and a right hand version. We had to reduce the size of the part to fit in the printing range of the 3D printers. It initially failed in the MakerBots because the plastic deflected. The printers would grind against the model and ruin the part. To solve this, we reduced the print by 50%, which took 8 hours to print each side. We also were able to use the printers in room 230, which had hotbeds. The normal size mugs could be printed on them without deflecting. Each side took 63 hours to print.
Once our smaller molds were completed, we began creating the plaster mix. The mix needed to contain the correct ratio of water in SI plaster, which is to 7 pounds of water to 10 pounds of plaster. We combined mixing and letting it set for 10 minutes before we poured it into the mold. We cut out wooden blocks and clamped them together. In order to prevent leakage, we also taped the bottom of the mold and placed a trash bag underneath.
Once it was poured into the mold, we tapped on the sides to release the air bubbles. It took us multiple tries to create a successful mold.
In the arms of the angel, fly away from here, from this dark, cold hotel.
Our first attempt contained too much plaster, and it resulted in being thick and difficult to separate. We then attempted a different ratio once we got new molds and added a light coat of Murphy's oil. We also took off the wooden poles because we realized it was holding onto the plaster more instead of pushing out the mold. In our final attempt, we concealed the holes to prevent leakage and made sure that the Murphy's oil was in every corner of the mug. The same process was applied to the bigger molds, and then we waited an entire week for them to dry.
After the molds had dried, we prepared to pour the slip by clamping and taping the molds together to prevent leakage. We mixed the slip to ensure it was homogeneous. It was then poured slowly to prevent splashing so it would avoid uneven drying and air bubbles. We let the smaller mold dry for 30 minutes and the larger one for 40 minutes. After they were dry, we poured the remaining slip out on the handle side to create the mug shape. The mugs were laid handle side down to ensure that the handle would be the thickest part of the mug.
The molds then dried for an hour before the big reveal. While it was being demolded, we used a box cutter to trim off the excess clay at the top of the mug and the flash. The handle needed to be supported so that it wouldn't fall. We used a deck of cards for this. The mug took a week to dry, and the final step after that was to fire it in a kiln. Unfortunately, we ran out of time to bisque fire it, but it would have been done at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for an entire day. Although we did not complete the process, we can now say that we know how to complete a manufacturing process.
We did it! We did it! We did it! Yay!